this, I think, can be directed at all of you. The earthquake highlighted governance authority issues, for example, between TEPCO and the central government. Do you expect there will be significant changes and improvements in governance in Japan, and given the political situation that exists there now?
Do we have 3 hours?
We have 10 minutes.
Should I start?
Go ahead.
I mean, looking at the current political turmoil, I don't expect to see a rapid change within the next few years. However, looking at how the young people really see this earthquake as a real huge challenge. Actually, this is probably the biggest challenge of my life as well, as a Japanese who were born after the World War II. And I think young people in Japan definitely see it as a real serious threat and challenge, which will make them to change their attitude. And I think probably in maybe, not in 1 or 2 or 3 years, time, but 5 to 10 years, I think Japanese people have strength to turn around this incident, to really to have a new paradigm, a new attitude. And I think eventually the politics also will change as well.
We've seen over the past 20 years in Japan a continuing series of scandals in which one industry after another got into trouble, and in the process it exposed all kinds of incestuous relations between the industry and the government that may have seemed fine at one point in time, but had become rather dysfunctional. So in the late 80s, early 90s, you remember Japan Airlines, ANA, there were some funny things that went on there. The 90s was the story of the financial sector and the exposure of all of these Ministry of Finance officials who would retire through this amikudari process, retiring down into cushy jobs in the financial sector. That actually delayed the process of cleaning up the problems in that sector. This time around, it's electric power. And TEPCO looked really, really bad. And they, too, had that same incestuous relationship with the government that other sectors had. One hopes that, kind of like the financial sector, that maybe the process over the next 5 to 10 years is one of devising some new framework for how electric power operates and what its relationship is to the government that will lead to a better outcome. On the broader question of political leadership in Japan, I don't know. I'm going to duck that one. That may take longer.
No, I'll pass on political leadership.
Okay. Last question about the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which, as I'm sure you're all aware, is a major effort of 9 countries now to create what's going to be called the gold standard in free trade agreements, and involves the United States, and I won't try and remember all the rest of the countries offhand, but I'm curious if you've looked at or care to speculate about how the earthquake, tsunami, nuclear meltdown might impact Japan's willingness to engage in further market opening, especially related to the Trans-Pacific Partnership. There has been a delay in a decision on whether to join the TPP, but thoughts on where Japan might ultimately head on Trans-Pacific Partnership.
We're all looking at Ed. I only know the political aspect.
I'll start at least. There was a time last winter when Prime Minister Khan was making very favorable statements about getting Japan to join the TPP negotiations. It was never entirely clear to me, whether he really believed that or not. Of the many, politicians are always saying we ought to do X, Y, and Z, and so where this actually stood in his priority list was unclear. And second, it was unclear whether he really had the support of his own party. And so, in a way, I think the earthquake provided an excuse for Khan, perhaps when he discovered he didn't really have the support of his party, to kick the decision down the road a little bit farther. And having done that, it would now appear that the decision will be made after he is no longer prime minister. And who knows what the next prime minister is going to think about whether or not he can pull the party along into joining this. So, I don't know. I don't have very high hopes about Japan joining, in part because of what you just said, Dan, that this is supposed to be the gold standard of trade agreements, and that's not the kind of regional trade agreement that Japan has been signing for the last 10 years. And that's because none of the politicians have really been able to tackle the fundamental problem of the farm lobby in Japan. And maybe more broadly than that, just the idea of being a lot more open. That's a difficult concept for them to come to grips with.
Satu is going to comment on this as well. At the APEC summit in Honolulu coming up in November, there's supposed to be quite a bit of progress on this. But one other aspect of TPP is that it's viewed as a stepping stone toward a free trade area of the Pacific that would encompass all the countries. So it's taken on a tremendous amount of significance.
Yeah.
But Satu, did you want to?
Yeah, a couple of things. I wouldn't even presume to speak on whether market opening. I mean, this goes back and forth about whether the tsunami disaster and the agricultural impact of that would lead to an opening and a restructuring. I'll say two things on it, quite apart from what Japan decides. I tend to be doubtful, like Ed, that Japan will move in this direction after a couple of trips there and several interviews, and we've been working on TPP a bit at the center. We have a big project on TPP, in fact. A couple of things I'd just point out. One is it's not only up to Japan now. Because the negotiations have started and there will have to be a framework delivered at APEC, I myself am, first of all, highly doubtful that we will achieve a gold standard result to announce at APEC in November, number one. Number two, the framework agreement that emerges at APEC in November, which the President will release and announce, will, I think, be somewhat of a signal to how Japan responds to that framework. Because the framework will have elements for future members docking onto the agreement, exceptions, etc., will be written into that framework. The third point I would make is that simultaneously there's a lot of noise about a trilateral trade agreement between Korea, Japan, and China. I also don't think that's going to come anytime soon, but it's always left up there as a competitive thing. And finally, a very wise Japanese senior official told me, I thought it seemed to make a lot of sense. He was highly skeptical of even entering into the TP negotiations at this stage on a very interesting argument he made, is that Japan should not get into the discussions without consensus and agreement at home, because if it does, it's amongst the TPP members, except for the United States, Japan would be the second biggest weight. And if it pulled out the rug from under the negotiations without sufficient consensus at home, it could be accused of breaking up the TPP process as a whole. And that's a burden that neither the alliance, U.S.-Japan alliance, nor Japan's external trade policy could successfully hold.
Just a thing. That was actually really interesting. And it would be almost be easier for the Japanese government to simply wait until the whole thing is done and signed, and then sell it at home by saying, oh my goodness, we are being disadvantaged because these other countries have all this free trade going on, and we're on the outside. Just the way that the Japanese business community did with Mexico. When the Maquiladora program ended after Mexico joined NAFTA, which disadvantaged Japanese firms.
And the other thing to watch for is whether our 3 trade agreements pending before Congress will pass themselves. I mean, we have the big Korea-U.S. trade agreement, Colombia and Panama sitting before Congress. And for what it's worth, I would be shocked. I think they will pass, but I think it will be much later than this summer. I do not think we have sufficient consensus on trade adjustment assistance yet.
We should probably also note that TPP is going forward with U.S. negotiators not having trade promotion authority.
Right.
Sort of,
Right.
That's sort of kind of technical. They're acting as though they have that authority, but they do not. So that's another story. Well, thank you all very much for coming today. We really appreciate you taking the time. Thank you so much to the Japan-America Society and the staff, Doug Erber, and others who have put this together. And thank you to each of the panelists. I thought this was a terrific discussion. And please join me in a round of applause for all this. Thank you very much.